Parody.
Hello and welcome back to Breathing Underwater's Moviecast. I am here in person, in the flesh, with my twinsiest twin brother that's ever twinned,
Dave.
And just today, as of recording this, we finished watching Attack on Titan together.
Yes, we did.
So if you would like any further context or history about our context and history with anime, we did an episode together about it a little while back. Episode 21. But for this episode, we are going to focus more specifically on Attack on Titan. The way that this went down was Dave watched it. Why did you watch it originally? What inspired you?
It was like 2013, 14, whenever it first came out on Netflix. And I was out of work at the time, trying to break into my mental health field. I had a lot of time in my hands, and it just came up on the new animes, and I just
so you found it kind of organically, like it wasn't like buzz, or you didn't know about the manga?
Nope.
Okay.
Nothing about it.
Yeah, I'd never heard on it. It's been around for like 10 years on the anime form?
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know that. I didn't realize that, especially because it was only 4 seasons.
Mm-hmm.
So wow, people have been waiting a long time to see how this ends.
Oh,
and you said they were waiting to finish the manga before they could finish the show, right?
Yes.
So the manga it's not like it was done a long time ago and then they were adapting it, but people knew.
No.
Yeah, wow. Okay, that's quite a stretch there. I got to give it up for Attack on Titan fans for sticking with it for as long as it did. Maybe was part of their plan, though, because it got so popular. Maybe it did partially because
it almost lost most of its popularity because there was a 3 to 4 year gap between the first and second season.
Wow.
And then not much of a gap between the second and third. Yeah, I don't know why it took so long.
Huh.
I don't think it was because of the manga, but it was.
I'm sure there's a history explanation out there somewhere, but that's not the point of this episode. The point of this is to dig a little into more of our personal reactions and thoughts and feelings and big picture stuff, and also some nitpicky stuff. So you saw it as it was being released. You were keeping up with it. Mm-hmm. And then he was so into it for the past few years and been bugging me, when are you going to watch Attack on Titan? When are you going to start Attack on Titan?
Uh-huh.
And I think the thing that I heard constantly from you was, dude, you don't even know. You don't even know what's going to happen. You don't even know how it's going to blow your mind. Oh my God. So he's been hyping it up for a long time. And I finally got around. Well, it was because it was a few months ago I was here. Mm-hmm. We're in Baltimore at Dave's place, by the way. Mm-hmm. And he was like, look, you got to at least watch a few episodes with me. And then, like, watching a couple episodes turned into watching, I don't know, like half a dozen or something.
Yeah, you wanted to keep watching that first night.
Well, you were like, no, but you don't even know. Like, this next thing's going to happen. You got to just see this one more thing. Oh, but then there's this other thing. You got to see this. And so, so we started it. And then I took a little break because I was going to try to watch it with the wife. And we tried, but she just wasn't really into it, especially the tone. And it was just so dark and vicious. So then I went back to it on my own. And so basically over the past couple months, I've been binging it. And I finally got to, as of like yesterday, I got to the episode 29 right before the 2 movies, right? Did they release them theatrically at all, or do you know?
I don't think so.
No? So they're just like TV movies. And then today he and I sat down and watched the last 2 movies together. And now here we are. So before we get into Attack on Titan specifically, you want to get some of the peripheral stuff out of the way? Cool. And then we can really just focus on the show itself. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, before we attack the Titan, the thing that you brought up, you were mentioning, as you knew this was coming to a close for me, you brought up Neon Genesis, Evangelion, and Xenogears. So what is it you wanted to say about that as a comparison?
It kind of compares Titan a little bit because they were both big, I guess, epics that pulled a lot of big themes. A little different than Titan, but they're both. It's kind of like how Titan did a lot right that I think Evangelion didn't, where it had extremely complex story, depth of characters. Titan put it all together. It all made sense. There was a reason for everything. This is a hot take that I watched Neon Genesis. I loved it in high school. I thought it was so off and deep. And
Yeah, you were so into it. You had like a poster.
Yeah.
One of the characters.
I drew the characters.
You got me into it.
I thought because it was like the unmech show,
Like a subversive take on the mech.
Because it pulled from like mysticism and depth psychology and stuff. Since these days I know mysticism very well and depth psychology, I'm a therapist, I know very well both themes, both schools. It was so overrated. It seems so overrated. I just like I didn't like it the second time through. It was just like this gobbledygook of like seemingly depth and complication that just didn't really mean anything. It just didn't go anywhere. It didn't fit. It just felt like someone who read the Kabbalah and read too many psychology books and just kind of threw it together and made it seem like there was this depth going on with the interpersonal character moments and all that. But it was just didn't make sense. None of the themes made much sense. It's something about repetition compulsion, I guess, at the very end of Neon Genesis, but so overrated in my opinion.
So you feel like it thought it was smarter
Yes.
than it really was.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I've been noticing that too about things that I once thought were really deep or really smart or really well, crafted, and then later you're like, oh, when you have more perspective and more experiences, like you said, and more education on things, that you realize that was how it's presented, to make you feel like that, but it can be very like surface or arbitrary.
Yeah, just a quick comparison. I was just thinking about this years ago. Video game Xenogears, which to me was the best thing Square put out in the 90s that was non-Final Fantasy related. It was a masterpiece of a game, complete masterpiece.
Is it a role-playing game?
Oh yeah, it's fantastic.
What system was it on? Because I don't
PlayStation 1.
Oh, okay, yeah. I was kind of.
I didn't really play the others, Saga, the Xenogears. I played Xenoblade, the first one, which was great too. But Xenogears was pulled from a lot of deep, mystical, esoteric stuff from the West and depth psychology. But, like, it all made sense. All the themes, all the story. And again, like Attack on Titan, like Xenogears, had an extremely complex story. But it all fit. It all made sense at the end. I mean, I had to read all the summaries to make sense of it. Attack on Titan at least is explained. You have to, like, watch it through again. You have to think about it. But it all makes sense, so...
Oh, yeah, and you watched Attack on Titan all the way through twice.
Yep.
And then you watched the last couple again with me today, so that's like 3 for...
Plus I watched the episodes in Spanish, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, you do definitely have more...
I've read many wiki fan articles on it to try to make sense of all the details that couldn't make sense of, yeah.
Yeah, so that's where he's coming from, and then I'm way more fresh... off the boat.
Yeah.
Just like it's all just percolating still, and I'm sure I'll have revelations and aha moments later on, but this is my initial kind of reaction. But again, before we get there, you mentioned Neon Genesis. It made me remember that I had a student a long time ago that was really into anime, and they asked me about recommendations, and I told them about that show because I just remember, I hadn't seen it since we were kids, but I remember it being so profound. And I remember their feedback to me at the time was like, "Why did you make me watch that? Like, my whole life, everything's changed. Like, I can never go back before." I don't know, like it blew their mind completely. But they're an adult now, and they have children of their own, and I'm just wondering if they have this, I'll have to ask her about it sometime and see what she says. Anyway, so, comparing it to things, one thing that came up a lot, and you and I discussed this a little bit earlier, was how it had a similar kind of, not like direct similarity or structure, but Lost came up a lot as I was watching it and thinking about it and reacting to it, because it had those huge twists and revelations that like recontextualize things. Yeah. And there is like a central mystery. Yeah. Like on Lost, it's like, what is this island and what's going on here? And then in Attack on Titan, it's like, what are the Titans? Why?
Why is this world this way? It doesn't make sense.
And there's that big central mystery, and then it just gets more and more. There's more and more lore and discoveries, built upon that. But the reason that it, like Lost specifically kept coming up in my mind as I was watching and reacting to it was that it was one of those, like Lost, I had that similar reaction of like every time there was a revelation or an answered question, it just created like and spawned 50 more new questions. But it's like, okay, well, I get that, but then what about this, and this? But I got to say though that now that I've seen the whole thing, of Lost and this, I definitely think that this was better written, and you can tell that it was thought out. I mean, and we all know that Lost was the J.J. Abrams mystery box thing, where he didn't even know what was in the box. He just had all this fun, like interesting, somewhat derivative ideas that you've seen in other places, but were presented in a new context. It's people stranded on an island, but he didn't know where he was going with any of it. He didn't have the end. It really seems like Titan is something that you couldn't have just started on page 1 and just and just had those 3 characters and like, we'll figure it out as we go. Yeah. It really seems like they knew exactly from that first scene. They knew exactly where they were going, and all the pieces fit together. And we'll talk more about that later, but the writing, the monumental, gargantuan writing challenge that must have been to conceptualize that thing. Because I'm wondering, like, if at some point, whoever the creator was...
Oh, what's his name?
Yeah.
One man did it all.
Yeah, and that's incredible, too. But I could see, he's like, oh, what if there were all these, like, mindless giants just running around eating people? Like, I could see that being an inspiration, or your initial idea, and then fill in all the blanks of like why they're there.
Hajime Isayama. Isayama.
I don't know if I'll ever quite understand his process and how he was able to put all that together. But like something like Lost, I totally understood why it was so convoluted and confusing, is because they didn't know where they were going. They didn't even know. None of it meant anything at first. Yeah. The characters were what they were, but the plot and the world building was all just kind of like, they were just laying the track as the train was moving. Yeah. But Attack on Titan, you could tell that it was like airtight. Just as another like comparison example, is definitely like a better version of this type of storytelling than, like you said, like Neon Genesis or Lost. Okay, and there's one other, as a total non sequitur. I think it is worth having a little mini discussion, though, about subtitles versus dub and how we experience it. So you watched it twice through fully, and then you said I know you watched some of it in Spanish. Was that subbed and dubbed in Spanish at the same time because you were immersing, or was
it just dubbed?
Okay. And if you're curious more about Dave's immersion language learning journey, we talked about that on a recent episode on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/breathingunderwater, where he played Hogwarts Legacy and talked about his experience with language learning. So you can glean more information over there. But otherwise, when you're getting it in English, did you ever watch the dub, or were you sub both times you watched it all the way through?
Oh yeah. So the first time was sub, the second time was dubbed.
Okay. Oh, so you did watch it dubbed?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. You got it both. Did you have a preference?
Sub all the way.
Yeah, I figured. So I
prefer subs with animes.
And I always did too, especially when we were younger. And, just watching anything that's not in English first, I always preferred subtitles. And I know that you're more like OG gangsta if you watch sub, you're like in the sub club. But if you're into dubs, it's like there's almost like a poser attitude out there. I've seen.
I personally don't care. I just personally have that preference.
I get that from you, but I've definitely seen a lot of like judgment. Like you're a real anime fan or just foreign content media fan only if you like experience it in its natural language. And then subtitles. Somebody said recently, the guy, I don't want to mispronounce his name, but the guy that did like Parasite, and he won Best Picture. I think it might have been him, and and he did like the Host and Snowpiercer and stuff. I think it was him that had said recently that if audiences could just get over that, like, I don't remember what, the 2-inch or the inch at the bottom of your screen, then there's like a whole world of storytelling beyond Hollywood that is worth your time, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing, but he said something about, he was basically just saying like, get over it, people. Like, just because it's subtitles, doesn't make it like lesser or more challenging or not worth your time. I got a hot take. And this is personal preference. I know that these are personal preference things. They're not right or wrong. It's not how things, should be. I mean, if anything, I'm sure that filmmakers would prefer that their stuff is experienced in its natural language. That's not dubbed over or subtitled, because the subtitles, my issue with subtitles are, as much as I used to, also rally behind them and champion them too, but my issue with subtitles are that they're visually distracting on a visual medium.
So that's the one flaw with them, of course.
And I know, like people have their arguments, and they'll be like, well, you just read them quick, or you just kind of get the gist of it, or you skim it, or or whatever. It's like, stop complaining. It's just how it is. I totally get, and I agree with all that on principle. But the older that I've gotten, the more that I've really been a analyzer of film, not just an enjoyer of it. The visual part of it is become more and more important to me. Mm-hmm. That's one reason that I really, not only just because there's so many other things at play with white television, it's just not my favorite form of visual narrative storytelling because of all the the politics at play, like the restrictive episode lengths and the show cancellations and and budget cuts and all the things that affect the quality of a long running either episodic or serialized television show. A bigger issue that I have with a lot of TV is that it's an excuse for writers to overdo dialogue. And this is changing, or it's there's more and more really cinematic television happening with bigger budget and more binge worthy, like Stranger Things and Lost was a big proponent of that. But even then, a lot of television is centered around, and I know part of it is because of budget, because of limited sets and limited locations and camera movement availability and stuff, where they don't have these big rigs that can do all this, and time too. They have to traditionally, at least television, they had a short amount of time to film it, so it's just easier to sit people down and film coverage, the back and forth talking. But to me, dialogue, when done well, and done intentionally, with Tarantino and stuff, it can be very visually entertaining too. And I just watched, and I'll have a podcast out at some point about the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel and how cinematic that show is. Even in dialogue scenes, they're very, very visually stimulating and creative as they exposit information, or have discussions and stuff like that in the television format. But I find that film, there's plenty of films that rely too heavily on dialogue for information and and aren't visually interesting.
Well, that's one reason TV shows are actually better for language learning than movies.
Because there's so much more talking.
So much more dialogue, yeah.
And that is what it is. I'm not saying that that's bad. It's just that for me as a personal preference, if I'm watching a visual thing, I prefer that it's visually told first, and that dialogue is a extra component, but not necessarily necessary to understand what's going on. You know what I mean? You can turn the volume off and still watch something and still understand what's happening through the visuals. That's just how I prefer, glean information better, is by the visual impact and the presentation, as opposed to just what people are talking about. That's a smaller part of it for me. So to me then, subtitles aren't the most important part of getting information, shouldn't be, of getting information from things, because like I said, if they utilize the visual medium correctly, then the words should be negligible to inconsequential, or peripheral, more or less. I'm talking in general here. Even if it is very dialogue heavy and it's just relying on that, that's fine. If that's what I know I'm getting into, but I still want to watch the characters and their reactions and their facial expressions and the editing. Like how the shots are composed and so the subtitles are just distracting for me, and so I'm kind of
watch dub more.
Well, yeah, but then the problem you run into with dub is a lot of things, and this is one reason we talked about back on our anime episode that I didn't like Demon Slayer, was because the dubs were so bad, so obnoxious, and so they didn't match the emotionality of the scene. They just felt arbitrary. person didn't even know what they were reading for. They were just reading lines, with like implied emotions and stuff like that. And I've seen that so many times with, and I know it's a budget thing, and if you get like, you don't have like top of the line actors to do it, you don't want to pay them as much. I get it. I totally get it. But my point is that like, if it's between a bad dub or subtitles, I'm probably still at this point going to take the dub because I still want to be immersed in it visually. Subtitles take me out of it, and they make me, feel like I'm not in the experience and in the movie or in the show. I'm having to like, read something. And it's not because I don't like reading. I love to read, but I don't want to read while I'm watching. I feel like those things are in direct contradiction to each other.
That's why in my language learning, I never really watched. A lot of people do this, but I never really watched a show with the subtitles on because, for one, reading a second language takes a lot more time. I can't just skim it. And two, it's like that conflict's heightened if you're doing language learning, where it's the conflict between the visual words and the visuals, the story and movie.
Yeah, like I said, it all depends on what you're trying to get out of it, and that's my point. Is that like, if I'm experiencing a visual medium, I want to get the visuals first, and the music and the audio, the audio, not the words written out for me on screen. Yeah. But the other part of that too is that this thing that I'm seeing many people do this, including people in my life that I watch a lot of TV with, is they just want the subtitles on all the time, even if it's already in its native language.
Yeah, what is
that's a trend, and I remember I've been hearing more and more people like talk about this too online as they talk about things that they watch. They'll just have the subtitles on, and they'll have it on in the background, and they can just read along with it. So I know that's like a whole culture and trend that's spreading right now, is to just always have the subtitles on, and that it's one thing if you're watching something that isn't in your native language and it's kind of necessary to have it translated for you, whether it's dubbed or subbed, but to listen and have it, I don't know, I'm too like ADHD to make myself focus and ignore this, even if I can understand everything they're saying. And then the argument that I've heard a lot is that it's like, well, you miss things if you don't have the subtitles on. If you have the subtitles on, you don't miss as much. Because when people talking fast, or they're mumbling, or they're screaming, or you don't always know exactly what they're saying. And I'm like, but again, it takes me back to the visuals.
Yep.
That's what should be giving you the most information, not the specific words.
Well, people are thinking information as opposed to the experience.
Yeah.
It's a problem with our society and difficulty of immersing and experiencing something and not having your head get it all. There's this like fallacy in our culture that your head's got to consciously register everything. We don't trust anything unconscious or an experience deeper than thought, like emotional, kinetic, visual.
But that's why I thought it was interesting
that
I've watched the whole Attack on Titan in dub, kind of on principle. But I thought it did have a really good voice cast, and the actors did their performances pretty well. Like I thought it all matched what was going on. Like pretty good. But then today, when we sat down together to watch the last couple features, I decided to put it on subtitles just to see the difference. And some of the voices were very different than what I was expecting, especially Hanji and Armin. Their voices were way different from the dub, so that was a little disconcerting. But I got to say, watching those with the subtitles, especially because those last episodes were all battle, it was all visual. The subtitles were pretty distracting, and it just reaffirmed and reconfirmed for me what I already knew to be true for me, is that like I just prefer dub over sub.
Okay.
And I'm getting tired of this new culture that's arising of like having subtitles on all the time just to have them on principle because you can. I feel like it's murdering the value of a visual thing. We might as well just be listening to audiobooks at this point.
Yeah.
Or like audio picture books. Because, like, I don't know, all I'm trying to say is I'm advocating for a return to a focus on the visual medium of visual storytelling. Sure. Not the information, like you were saying, not the information experience.
Yeah, like as an idea.
Yeah. All right, so we've been talking around it a while. Let's just get into are more specific, general, and more micro and macro thoughts on Attack on Titan. So now, having seen this show 2 times all the way through, plus the climax more, what's your just general overall take? Like, do you feel like it held up as well the second time?
Yeah. I liked the Japanese acting so much more than the English that I did emotionally feel it a lot more in the Japanese one.
But you watched the sub the first time.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe because the show is imprinted me that way.
Yeah. What was like your biggest takeaway from watching it again?
Oh, so many details made sense and clicked into place. There was a lot of loose ends I just didn't understand the first time through. I had to look up a lot. Like, why were, pure Titans like this? Why this? A lot of different details. What happened to Ymir? Because some things they'll show you in, like, a scene, and you just forget that one scene where they explain something.
Yeah.
The Ymir who was the Jaw Titan. Yeah,
Ymir, not Amir, right?
Well, Ymir, yeah.
Ymir.
She was named after Ymir, the original Titan.
Oh, okay.
So that's confusing.
Oh, I should have said this earlier, but full spoilers. So trite to me these days. Like, if you're going to talk about something that you've seen all the way through,
yes,
you're going to want to talk about all of it. This isn't a review as much of a discussion. And we're not going to break down, like, every episode or season or, go into this is what it really meant.
We're not. 3.5 hour long discussion.
Yeah, no. No, I just want to give an overview and kind of bring it back to what I often like to do with this podcast, with the Moviecast, is use it as storytelling, learning, and improvement. What can we glean from this particular experience? Because I think there's always something to get out of experiencing a story in its whole form, whether it's a movie or a miniseries or a full serialized TV show. How was it structured? How was it presented and everything? And on that note, that's what I found most compelling about it as I was watching it, and then as revelations would happen and recontextualize everything, was how it was structured. I thought it was really interesting, because it's one of those things where it could have been told more linearly. It could have started with like Eren later and his big plan. We could have been let in more. It could have been not a mystery and more of an action, or focused on the thematic content from the get-go, instead of it being doled out in little pieces. Just like any story, there's different points of view and different ways that it could have gone. I just think it's really fascinating how they decided to basically give us the first 3/4 of the show was from the Eldians and their plight point of view. It was only the last season that we learned about the outside world and the Marlians, and we got glimpses of stuff, and it learning about the wider world recontextualized a lot of things that happened in the show, like infiltrating Titans and all that kind of stuff, and like of course why the pure Titans were attacking them for 100 years and everything. But still, like, we were poised to be sympathetic to what the Eldians were subjected to because of the Marlians. And I just found that interesting. And at first, when we got to the mainland and that whole new cast of characters were introduced, and I was like, wow, they're gonna really try to force a whole new perspective and get us to like sympathize with a whole new cast of characters really late in the game. I was a little concerned about that. It was a storytelling technique. I was like, I wonder why they didn't parallel these things earlier. We got the reveal earlier, and then we learned and had time, spent time with these characters. But I thought they did a good job balancing that and giving that dedicated time to the new characters. And then, of course, the ones that the carryovers, like Rhina and Zeke. Well, Amir very briefly, and then she got eaten. Ymir. Let's see. So, who was your favorite character?
I can't say I have a favorite. I mean, everybody loves Mikasa.
Yeah, she was a dead ringer for me to be a favorite character.
Dorman. Everybody loves Levi.
Yeah, I would point to Levi just as my, like, the most consistent, and even like with everything changing and all the reveals around him, he always stayed steadfast and consistent. His personality. Interesting about it too was that my biggest, I don't want to say flaw, but the thing that like kind of kept me from being totally head over heels for it was the constant sort of like changing, shifting, or recontextualized motivations of characters. Like a whole plot line would play out, for like with the scouts, and then you would learn that actually like this whole other thing was actually happening, and they would go back and reveal, that they were planning this thing from the beginning. And it was a really cool twist. It was like really like shocking or, like mind-blowing kind of revelations that they would do. But it also like, it kept me at arm's length a little bit with feeling like I was in the shoes of a lot of those characters. Like I felt more detached on the outside. So I do really feel more like it was a plot-driven show, even though it was character-driven because everything was happening was Aaron's choices. And then, of course, all the choices that were happening around him because of his puppeteering choices that he was making. But as a viewer, I felt like I was more being propelled along by the plot. And then as the plot would change things, I don't know, I just never felt as like deeply like emotionally connected to any of the characters that I wanted to be. Did you feel that empathy and fear for the character's plight and wanting the hero to succeed kind of stuff?
I did, but it was more spread than like just loving this like one character throughout the whole thing. I think it's because it's such a spread of characters, but I don't know. There was always returning to the original three main.
Yeah, they did do
Armin, Aaron, and Mikasa.
Though what I found was interesting too is in the last couple feature episodes, Aaron at that point was like really a non-character.
Yeah,
he wasn't really like present. Like it really refocused on like Armin.
Yeah,
and kind of Mikasa, I loved her characterization, but as a character, I felt like we were always being kept at arm's length again. Like we never really got into her psyche and true motivations. Like everybody around her was guessing, that she was like in love with Aaron or whatever it was, but we never really got from her. She was just a steadfast, bad and loyal, companion, and we always knew her motivation was to like protect Aaron above all else. But I don't feel we ever really got to know that much more about her until like the very end. So that's why I wouldn't put her in as like my favorite like character because even Levi, we got a lot more about him and like his backstory with what was the guy's name? The guy that kind of raised him.
What was his name? His uncle, yeah.
He was an Ackerman, right?
Yeah, it's his uncle.
We learned about that, and then we learned, about his relationship with
Commander Aaron. Yeah,
and we learned about their relationship. All that stuff, it helped me like kind of empathize and be able to step into Levi's shoes more than anybody else in the show, other than Aaron. But Aaron, I always found to be such a blockheaded emo, and I understand why. And then we understand even more why later, because he's dealing with this like time paradox, like inevitability that is overriding like all of his in the moment reactions and stuff. And
his character is one of the kind of anime tropes, or maybe shonen tropes, of a very emo, emotion reactive character who's very fiery and
seething, and he's just always like on his knees, like shouting at the heavens.
But it turns it on its head because he then his emo becomes complete trauma and destruction.
Yeah, he becomes a Never mind.
Is that an internet?
No, okay. I'm coining it now. Okay. When your emo becomes evil.
Oh, Demo. I'm not emo. I'm Demo.
So
then I'm wearing Demo.
So as the main character, I did find him interesting and compelling, but I also found him like kind of obnoxious, and I wanted to slap him a lot. When Levi beat the crap out of him at that one earlier in the trial, I was happy about that. I was totally fine when Aaron laid it out to Armin, because Armin was a whiny punk too, and he was always so insecure. I was like, come on, man. Like, just like, step up to the plate. Like, stop whining.
Someone I was watching it with, when I watched it the second time, wished in the earlier seasons someone would kick his and I was just thinking, you'll get your wish.
Yeah. All right, but so you mentioned the shonen stuff, so let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
So we were talking yesterday, and I was mentioning that I was rereading Scott McCloud's understanding comics, and then more recently his making comics, because Jeremiah and I from the Mobius Project, which you can learn more about at breathingunderwater.us, and our creative collaborative partnership. We're working on a graphic novel, and so I'm rereading some of the, the more like nuts and bolts stuff about comics to like reorient myself with that world and the craft behind the scenes side of things. And he talks a lot about manga in making comics. He talks a little bit about it in understanding comics too, but Scott McCloud was very influenced by manga early on, because I guess when he was working for DC, when he was like a young like intern or like entry level something illustrator, I'm not sure exactly what he was doing, but he was working for DC, and he said around the corner was a early like manga shop, like a Japanese pop culture kind of place, like we have these Hello Kitty stores and stuff now, but he would go down there and get early manga. A lot of it, he said, wasn't even translated, so a lot of it was just, he was just going back to our subtitle discussion. He was very looking at the visuals and the visual storytelling and letting that influence his. But he brings up in there the definition of shonen, and I don't remember the feminine counterpart to it, the word, but he mentions those two, like basically you have one directed at young males and one directed at young females, and the young female stuff tended to be more like young female oriented romance, like schoolgirls with big dreams but stuck in a rut kind of stuff, or like power fantasy stuff like Sailor Moon. Like you said, there was that side, and then there was a shonen side, which was for young boys, which was like hero action dominating
Dragon Ball Z.
Yeah, exactly. When you've talked to me about shonen a lot recently, like when we did our last episode of anime and we were talking about Demon Slayer, and I was giving you all my gripes about it, and you're saying, well, these are, also shonen tropes that I've been looking at it as like this one kind of thing, but I wasn't looking at it as a dichotomy as much between sort of like a demographic, audience expectation. So talk about that a little bit, about like, because that was a big thing that you really wanted me to experience when we were getting into Attack on Titan. You wanted me to see how it was sort of like a shonen, but also like a complete, not satire, but like reversal of what the shonen tropes were.
If you think of Attack on Titan, take the shonen tropes and put it on. Well, one thing we got to discuss is that you had a hard time because you're not used to the shonen world and shonen tropes.
Apparently, yeah.
You didn't understand how like they would stop in the middle of action, do this long exposition about their psychological experience, what they're planning, and
just
stuff like that.
Kill the tension and
that's normal for a shonen. But yeah, Attack on Titan overall, like it would take the shonen, some of the shonen tropes. Like the biggest one is obviously the protagonist being overpowered and being like basically demigods in the end. They're like they have so much power, they go Super Saiyan, and
but they have to work and struggle.
They have to work and
there,
struggle,
right?
and almost die multiple times. It's a struggle, and it's earned at the end. But at the end, they're just like a god. And in this, the protagonist becomes overpowered, but the protagonist is so effing traumatized and driven by a traumatized, phantom of Ymir. It's like it's like, oops, you want the protagonist to be overpowered? Here's what happens. World destroyed, which is really cool. It was very, very different. One more smaller point is like Mikasa, like a lot of shonens they make, because it's young boys, so they'll make like this like colored hair goofy girl who loves the guy no matter how much a douche he is, and because it's young boy's fantasy. And instead, Mikasa was never that. She was never just this sex symbol. She was a very strong character even without her powers. And none of the female characters were that. Were like this, just like this sex fantasy for the boys, So it was a very unsexualized show, which makes it appeal to both. Actually, it doesn't not just be like a boy, young boys show or male show. It's more adult, but
well, I'm wondering if that whole side of things had a bigger impact on you just because you were more familiar with shonen tropes.
Yeah, I didn't watch things like Dragon Ball Z religiously. I watched it when it was on, kind of deal when I was younger.
Well, like we talked about in our previous anime episode, I think maybe you more than me, but we didn't somehow we just weren't really familiar with a lot of that stuff. And if anything, we were watching a lot of the reverse, the other side of the coin, the girl side. We watched
Mysterious Play
Mysterious
one. That was
Play,
very girl.
Remember Slayers?
Yeah,
was had a lot of I
didn't know which one that was. That was
more of a mix, but it was more of a comedic the structure, I think, of a shonen, but it was more about the romance in the end. So I think it was, and the main character was a girl. I think it was targeted more to that. Yeah, and Escaflowne, like we liked.
Yeah.
It had the action, but there was female protagonists that
girl whisked away, and there's a love triangle.
And love triangle, yeah. Like I for somehow, but then also like Cowboy Bebop was like totally a different.
No.
And the Miyazaki.
It
stuff
had more.
and,
Had more shonen-esque tropes to it, but it wasn't like a shonen exactly.
Well, obviously,
it was more of a shonen.
These things don't always fall cleanly into one area or another.
No,
but I think
Cowboy Bebop's
when it comes to manga and then like the more long form manga adaptation like TV shows, those seem to be the most popular because like Eddie right now, you know, he was in a Demon Slayer earlier, but he's really and has been really into One Piece and Jujutsu Kaisen and My Hero Academia, One Punch Man, like all that stuff that are very, I think is very more like typical shonen kind of. Some of it,
it's very like over the top, very like.
But there, it's almost
like
kind
of stuff.
But it's very video gamey too because like these characters keep increasing power ups. And they keep like they go to like.
That's
higher.
one way you can see shonens is very very video game. We power up our characters.
That's how it comes across to me. But I guess as when we were younger, I don't know if it was exposure and or preference or more one or the other. But I just have not been as familiar with. I knew about Dragon Ball Z and stuff, but for some reason, like we just never really watched it or got into it.
More recent show that's really good. I haven't watched much of it. Is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure.
You've mentioned it.
Yeah, it's like 4 seasons. I watched like half of one of the seasons. I think I watched it out of order. That's a really well done shonen, but it's very much a shonen trope.
It sounds like that aspect of it had a bigger impact on you just because you're more familiar with those tropes.
Yeah,
and I was more peripheral to it. Like I knew about and heard about these things, but the show was more impactful to me in a self-contained way. I wasn't as comparing it as much to other anime and manga and those Japanese storytelling tropes.
There's more than just those two.
Absolutely, yeah. But those are like kind of the more prominent ones.
Yeah,
right? Or
you
got
slice of life ones is very well known. You got fantasy ones that may not hit you.
Well, we were definitely more like in the more cinematic realm too, because we were early on like exposed to like because it was available like Blockbuster, like Akira.
Yep.
And Ninja Scroll.
Yep.
And stuff that it pulled from those things, but it wasn't. It was its own. Kind of thing. And okay, so thematically speaking, since we're talking about big picture structure stuff, throughout the show, it really tried to cover a lot of ground. It really hit a lot of big picture stuff. And some of it I thought hit perfectly. And then some of it I was like, where are they going with this? Or are they going to do anything more with this? So one thing that I asked you about last night or yesterday right before it ended was, are we ever going to see anything else about the religious sects that were worshiping the walls and that kind of stuff? And they implied a lot early on with them that they were like an important part of this equation, and then they basically got like literally trampled. And and then we learned about the secrets they were protecting and stuff. But I don't know. I didn't feel like it had as much to say about that specific aspect, and I was wondering why they included that, other than as just sort of like a window into what was to come, as opposed to being more.
It was implied that they were one of the protective mechanisms. They needed some. I don't think this was stated, but more implied that the Rice dynasty. Every generation of the new Titan passed on, erasing everybody's memory. They still needed some active way to suppress. The government's doing it, but I think they were there to. It's almost like someone had to remember so they could suppress it. So someone had to know the truth. I think that's what they were supposed to be. Like the active mechanism, protective mechanism against more people knowing. It's just one hypothesis I have.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm sure there's different ways you can interpret it, but it also, to me, at the end, felt a little bit like a misdirect or a misnomer or a loose end. A little bit more on the Lost front, where they were like presented you with this thing that you figured were going to be paid off in a bigger way, but they just kind of they let it go or forgot about it, or they didn't, and it was never meant to be important. But I was really curious about that. You had the other side of that coin with all the politics at play, and it was such a politically heavy and like a chess game of moving these political pieces around. But in the end, I thought it was really interesting, but also made me question, like, why do we have to spend so much time on the politics side of things when really what it came down to was, like, kaiju battles. It was really more about survival than it was about... All that stuff in the end didn't really matter because it was really about individuals and the choices that they were making. The governments were totally powerless against the storm. I mean, you know, in one way, I guess you could interpret it almost like as a natural disaster kind of thing. Like by the time the rumbling was happening, it felt more like a tidal wave, you know, was just over, and there's nothing they could do. Yeah. For the most part, except for like a small group of people, you know, that had some kind of insight into it. But the most people were just like fodder. You know, that they were just in the wake of this thing. And I think that's why a rewatch is probably really helpful for these kind of things that are so complex and so jam-packed full of different levels of things going on and thematic things. I was like, could this have been like just a couple seasons and it, you know, really just focused more on the action and I think it could have. You would have lost a lot of the, you know, the more like thematic, intricate stuff, but I don't know. I guess maybe that's part of like you know why it was presented the way it was how important are all of these, you know, petty little machinations and
perennial battles.
Like all the little things. Because I mean,
hatred ideologies.
We spent a whole like half seasons almost like, you know, on the like plugging the wall. You know, only for at the end the walls to not even really matter because they were annihilated. You know,
they mattered in that part of the story,
right? But I'm looking at it on a macro scale, like, or you know, like the whole like the female Titan sequence when we first, you know, meet Annie and she's chasing, and they're going through all the intricacies of their strategy, and they do that a lot. You know, where like the scouts and they'll have like a whole episode basically explaining the strategy to come. And how it's all going to work with the smoke flares and the different positions of the horse battalions, you know, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But in the end, I was, you know, it didn't really amount to anything on a bigger like macro scale, and so that makes me wonder on a thematic level, like nothing in this show felt unintentional. So I'm just gonna like give them benefit of the doubt that was all like done on purpose and it wasn't filler. They weren't just stretching to fill out a season like they definitely do and that's even from my kid, you know, that loves the shonen stuff. He'll talk about like filler episodes, and I've heard that there are whole like cultures and like, you know, watch lists and stuff on the line that tell you if you're gonna get into this show that has 1,000 episodes, here's the ones you actually are important, and then the rest of it is just filler. You know, you don't need to watch, you know, like the 6-part battle episode because
I tried to do that with Deep Space Nine once, but still, there's even a show like that. There's so many character moments. Yeah,
well, and that's what it really comes down to, right? Is like like I always find that fascinating that the female Titan was willing to spare certain people like Armin, you know, because and even knowing now what her goal was, but how callous.
Because Annie was a big softy underneath it all.
Yeah, but she also like kind of was putting on that front of being like totally uncaring and callous and cruel and like, but she had compassion. Those kind of things I think really played into what happened later when she's free again and everything. So yeah, I think there was. I'm just kind of, you know, reflecting out loud, but I think it was all very intentional, and it didn't feel like wasted time. There. Yeah.
Well, some of shonen is you're in the moment with it happening. You're not thinking of the deeper themes. You're like, this is happening now to get through this.
But it makes the deeper themes more impactful when you have those small character moments to bring you into it. Yeah. So it's not just plot.
Yeah. I think the show did a great job balancing those character moments and plot. Is it a plot-driven show or a character-driven show?
Yeah.
I think it's both equally.
But on that front, though, I got to say that I did find, and this is more, not just a shonen trope, but I think just more of a general, you know, difference between the East and West storytelling techniques and what audiences are used to and expect. The exposition and, like, stopping of the story to, like, explain. And even, you know, like, it's one thing to have a whole episode where you're talking about your battle strategy and stuff. It's another one where it's like the characters would be about to fight and they would just tell you every single thought that they're having, like, out loud in the moment. It was so unnatural. But I know this is, like, you know, a bigger thing. It's not isolated to this show.
It's like come from the manga where you be reading that in the manga.
Yeah.
Because it's got to explain, not show you as much. I guess it can through the pictures.
But even so, yeah, it's harder to get that stuff across when you're panel by panel. I get that, but on an adaptation front, And again, I'm not criticizing it for that, because I know that it's just the tried and true trope that is totally accepted by a huge part of the world audience for this stuff, and they're totally fine with it. But that I found that, that's was a gripe I had with Demon Slayer too, and I think it's just because, like I said, I never was as familiar with or as into the shonen type of stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think part of it is that, like, in going back to the subtitle discussion again, the visual versus informational storytelling, there was I just thought there were so many character moments that were deeply, deeply undercut emotionally, because the characters unnaturally would just tell you everything that they were thinking and feeling, and explain their motivations. But like no real human being would have that kind of insight into themselves or other people or situations that these characters did, about like, well, this is why I was going to do this, but then I felt this, and then I realized this, and they're able to articulate it to the people around them.
It's like you're journaling years later after.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh my God, that kind of stuff, just like subtitles, like took me out of the immersive experience of the story. It made me feel like I was like talking directly to the writer, and they were like, no, you got to understand this. This is what you got to understand right now about this character. And I was like, well, why not integrate that more, seamlessly and naturally into the visual and audio?
Anime doesn't do that.
I know, but that's the thing though. It does in certain contexts, and that I think that was the stuff that I was more used to. Yeah, like Miyazaki, for instance. We saw some of his stuff early on, and he doesn't do that for the most part.
He's very influenced by Western storytelling as well.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. So maybe that's why some of that was more appealing to me.
The other thing is the widespread of characters. There's the more this may not be even in East Asia. This may not be as true as the world modernizes, but there's more of a collective. It's more like seeing the group around you, not just the one superhero demigod like we would see in the West with like the Marvel world and all that. All the characters matter. Yeah. Almost as much as the main characters. It's not just this hyper focus on the individualistic protagonist. That's one thing I had to understand with years ago watching anime, why there can be such a spread of characters, and sometimes it takes away from the protagonist. I'm so used to the hyper focus on the one or two or three protagonists. And Titan's like that, and it's actually really good. Well,
it does speak to, like, culturally though, that's I never thought about that. That's a good point though, is that when you're in a we versus me type of culture, the storytelling will reflect that. When you're talking about a more community or culturally based culture, it is a bigger picture kind of thing.
And there's pros and cons to both.
Sure.
There's a hyper-individualistic narcissism, and then there's the hyper-conformity of a we culture. Mm-hmm. So both have their pros and cons, of course. Neither is better or worse either. In the context of storytelling as well,
The needs of the few or the one outweigh the needs of the many. So that's a perfect segue, though, into the other thing that was problematic for me, like being more super like into the show, like deep, like that visceral, like, God, this is just I got to see the next one. Like I really was more propelled by the plot than the character, and some of that was because there was just so many characters, and they kept introducing new people, and a lot of times they would introduce somebody briefly or like in the background, and then they would bring them back. So like a perfect example is Historia. I forgot she even existed.
I did for a while,
she was
too.
Such a side character. She was just one of the scouts. Yeah. And her character design was very similar to like Annie, blonde hair. Who is this? Yeah. And then all of a sudden she's like the most important character. I understand, again, it's a different like way of doing things, and like you just explained, but it for me, as a Western audience member, I had a hard time really like sticking to emotionally to any of the characters, because not only were most of them not safe, though I was surprised how many times that Reiner and Aaron, of course, but a lot of the characters, how they would have like limbs bitten off, or they would be like destroyed. I mean, when Armin. Yeah, it was interesting, and I get it. It's a main character syndrome thing, but like a lot of the characters, the side characters, or just like fodder characters, would get just flicked out of the way by Titan, and they were definitely a goner. but then somebody would get like totally slapped and hit a column or a tree and slide down it. Like that happened to Hanj a couple times, and you're like, oh well, she's definitely dead. And then she's like, I'm okay. You're like, okay.
Lost 9 this one.
Yeah, well, yeah, then so they'd have to go a little further and make it a little bit more permanent. Where like Levi or her lose an eye and stuff. But oh my gosh, like when Armin was burnt to a crisp,
yeah,
and he was still alive, I was like, oh my god.
And he fell down a high height.
Yeah, it's like this is absolutely insane and unbelievable. But I get it.
You can make it all.
Yeah.
There's so many times in Demon Slayer where some main characters, like, they would be dead.
They're dead.
They somehow made it through with their heart and their force of will.
Yeah.
And then they discover a new angle on their energy or magic or something.
You got a new angle on your parallelogram. And then by the time, like I said, they got the 4th season and they just introduced like this whole slew of new characters. I was like, oh man, I was overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed by how many characters there were, who they all were, how they were like important to the story and all that kind of stuff. But I thought they did a good job by the end of really focusing on a smaller group and them being like representational of the larger conflict instead of it being huge. Like that's what I was kind of expecting at the end, was like huge armies up against each other, but they really just whittled it down. So I thought by the end they kind of like made up for a lot of that deluge of characters.
Yeah. And
bringing back or refocusing on former side or supporting characters that suddenly become like super important. And I had to remember like who they were and what part they played previously when they were set up. Especially a lot of the characters went back to their early training days, and a lot of those characters I thought had similar designs and similar personality, like characterizations and stuff. So I was like, who? Like Sasha, she was so important, like emotionally to the characters, but throughout most of the show, she was just kind of there.
Yeah,
we never really got to know her very well. She had
except in that one early episode in season 2.
Oh yeah, well yeah, we got her backstory, and that helped. But then she wasn't like a focus of the show for a while.
She wasn't.
Then she came back around, But a lot of the characters too were like just characterized by like one major trait. That's why, like, it took me a while to really be attached to Sasha, because the only thing we knew about her was that she was hungry.
Yeah,
and she liked to eat, and she was so adorable when she would just. What is this? I've never had this. The most delicious thing ever.
She was a little bit like what's her name from the engineer from Serenity from Firefly.
My favorite, Kaylee.
Yeah, this naive country bumpkin girl who's sweet, but also like really smart and resourceful. Yeah. Well, can we talk about the part that I didn't like on Titan?
Yeah.
So. Some videos online were saying how genius it was at the end credits, and it was so great, That's, summing up the themes. But by the time I got there, the themes of the never-ending cycle of hate and violence was just beat into you. It's it's so obvious. But so they had to do this thing. I thought it was the perfect ending where you go through all of this to earn just that slight hope at the end. You saw that the Paradise Island is becoming this nationalist, actually fascist. That's the definition. Most people get the definition of fascism wrong.
Right.
That's a whole can of worms. But you got to know what you're questioning, because it's a very, very dangerous, toxic ideology. But you got to understand it correctly. Everyone thinks everything tyrannical or authoritarian is fascist. Fascism was a very specific movement.
Right.
But they were becoming a fascist nationalist movement. The Jaegerists, and so you went through all of this to get to that little bit of hope that, like, all the hell they went through, all the growth the main characters went through, led to their ability to their willingness to take a higher perspective and help
on all sides.
Help mediate all sides, which is actually I have, there's a certain belief system out there that's called integral, where integral people start to see above ideologies and sides, but it's very similar to that, and that it should just ended there. That there's all this hell you went through, that there can be maybe hope, but it's open ended.
Yeah, and
you saw Mikasa die, you saw all this stuff, that's fine, but then it's like, it becomes all futuristic and they're battling each other, boom, 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 and it's in this post-apocalyptic world again, and then Somebody finds the tree again, and it's like that cycle that repeats. It's like it falls too much into a postmodern nihilism, which is very good to the modern philosophy to get through the old naive tropes. That's what postmodernism is about in storytelling. But postmodernism trips up when it falls into an endless nihilism. Like, we just got to rub your nose in the cycle of so we can all see how it is. But you can't really have any hope.
And that makes me, I agree with you, and that makes me wonder...
Like, pulls the rug under you of, like, the little tiny bit of hope you get of all that you went through in the series.
That brings me back to, like, where the real hook was for the show for me, like, once I kind of got an idea about...
Yeah.
Not what the bigger story was, but, like, the answer to the question, what does all this mean?
Yeah.
Like, what is all leading up to? So, like... early on, I got the main theme that, like, war bad, humans bad, humans make bad choices and perpetuate,
We're living off the cycle of the cycle of all the traumas of history and just repeating it over and over again.
And like you said, they really, like, beat you over the head with it because you get so many examples, both just implied but also right out and said. Yeah. Oh, we're like at the end when he's like, oh, that's what our hate marching back at us or something.
Yeah, right, or something like that. Yeah.
So I was like, okay, I get that, but is that all it's going to be? Mm-hmm. And you're right. Like, in that last moment before the credits, you were like, oh. So this is about breaking the cycle. Yeah. And that, to me, that made it worth it. But like, then recanting that and just going back to the theme that we already knew and that we were already very familiar with and very understood, was the point was made many, many times, is like, and to end on that was disappointing because and if that was the whole point of the show, that's fine. But, like, we got it. Yeah. I don't know if we needed, like, 4 seasons of this tumultuous, gruesome, horrible. That's a reason that I don't watch a lot of, like, true crime. And I don't know, true crime is so popular because everybody. Well, and I was saying for the nonfiction part of it, it's so popular right now. Everybody loves true crime, but it's just so dark. It's like, why are we so interested in, like, the worst of humanity and we just indulge in it? But then also, like, in narrative sense, like, things like really nihilist, dark stuff like Game of Thrones, Walking Dead. Mm-hmm. I tried or just didn't even try because I knew what I was going to get. Like, thematically, I get attached to characters and they would get horribly, brutally murdered or,
Walking Dead,
traumatized, and it was so bleak and. In the end, for me, it was like, well, what is the point? Is it just to, like, indulge in depressive nihilism? Can
I talk a little about the modernist, postmodernist philosophy and integral? Modernism is in, like, liberal democracy. I won't get into the politics of it, but it's very optimistic and idealistic. We're marching towards a better future by la 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 la. Postmodernism is like the shadow of it. Look at all this crap. Look at all the marginalized. Look at all the. Look how humans really are. It's like it wants to unearth the shadow of modernism. But the problem is like with Game of Thrones, why I'm like one of the few who always loved fantasy who could never get into Game of Thrones when everybody else loved it. It's because a lot of humanity's there. The shadow in storytelling is coming up. It's like rubbing your nose in it. Look how effed up humanity is. Look how much we traumatized it. Look how horrible we are. Because we got to know this. We can't deny this. And And that's great. To not being just that old school, 80s man kind of, like big hero's going to solve everything, or
Well, step one of solving a problem is recognizing the problem.
Yes, but the problem is it gets stuck in a loop of it, of the shadow, the darkness, the horribleness of how humans and things really are. Like, how can serial killers and all this horrible stuff exist? Let's just create tons of stories about it. Let's go over tons of podcasts of true crime, and you get stuck in the misery of it. You go from like inflation to deflation, to lightness to darkness. A more mature version, I'm kind of a psychological futurist, would be like integral, which is you kind of see both. You don't get stuck in the naive idealism. You don't get stuck in the nihilistic obsession, mental rumination over the shadow to such a... You try to kind of see where it all kind of fits, which would be a very interesting storytelling, which I felt Titan did that until that very end where it just went into postmodern nihilism.
Why do you think they did that?
A lot of times that world just can't. I don't know. It's the way it kind of works. It's like we can't give you hope because we need I don't know, perfect hope in the world now or something. I don't know. There's something about that. Because at the end, the characters became integral. They saw beyond the Eledian and the Marleyan dichotomy. Mm-hmm. And they were a mix of the two. And it was kind of a hero's journey with all of them. They went through all that to become
better versions of themselves and make a more positive, constructive, sustainable
And they were going
world.
into the lion's den. That was amazing. You saw Levi was like this. He was like this broken war man, but he was like giving out candy to kids. It was great. It was like so how it like softened the people, and it had a lot to say there. I just to the end just like was like nope, no hope.
Well, at least though, I'll say that for those characters in their lifespan, they got to see that world. You know? That's something, right?
Oh yeah,
it's not totally bleak, but the bigger point was always that these cycles, no matter how much we try, we can't break this cycle because that's human nature, which is really sad and depressing.
Well, if it was truly, the thing is, if it was truly based off an integral perspective, it would allow for hope at the end, because there's more hope. There's not naive optimism, but there's hope with it.
So you think it was postmodern the whole time?
It had a lot of integral leanings to get beyond modernism, the modernism postmodernism dichotomy. You could say that the religious people and the kings and all that were more the traditionalists in it.
Right.
That's the older value system, but these are good to examine for storytelling, not for like politics, but for storytelling.
Absolutely. Well, and we'll end on that in a second. I just got two more little nitpicky things to cover, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay. No, I started like rolling my eyes every episode. It would happen multiple times, and it could be just a loss in translation thing or whatever. But somebody would say something, and then they would say "that said," and then they would. Did you notice that? They'd said it constantly. They're like, "I'm going to kill you now." That said, and then they would say something, and I like, oh my god, they say that. This could be called Attack on That Said, because they are like.
It could be an artifact of the Japanese language. There are things. There's almost no language that could be as far from English as Japanese.
It was just so predictable. Like I saw it coming from a mile away. Every time somebody would say something, then pause, or like they're gonna say "that said." Ah, there it is.
Yeah,
that said.
There's these structures that are really implicit. That what I know of linguistics that even with the best fluent translators, like there's subtle things that just don't make sense by a subtle feel that you just don't get from your own language to another. Especially if it's a European to East Asian language, because they're very different.
Well, that's the thing, right? I mean, there's no such thing as a one-to-one translation.
Oh no, there
isn't. A language isn't words.
No,
it's meaning.
It's meaning,
and the way that we articulate
that
said. Meaning.
Any linguist would agree with you on that,
right? So, like when you're communicating something,
even the words have different meaning, even if they seem to be the same words.
Exactly. So I get that, and I don't fault the show for that, but it was like watching the dub. Maybe they wouldn't. Maybe it wasn't in the sub as much. I'd be curious to compare now.
I don't know.
But the dub, they say "that said" constantly, but that also just speaks to the other part of anime that's really hard. I think when it comes to translation is you're trying to fit a certain cadence and structure of words into a mouth moving that wasn't made for that originally. So I'm sure that there was a lot of like words or the way that they were saying things. I'm sure it happens all the time in any kind of dubbed language media, is that they have to kind of like BS a lot of it or not do it as natural as it could have been. Yeah. If they didn't have to stick to that mouth that was pre-animated. Yeah, saying they had to try to kind of match,
and that's hard.
That probably happens.
I don't even know how they do that
all the time. I was just as I was watching, I was like, man, this has got to be just somebody's job right here. It's not even the translation, but trying to like figure out what words are going to fit in the timing of this mouth moving.
Well, like how Netflix can have like 20 languages for a popular show or movie.
Yeah, but they're trying to make it as natural as possible that has got to be one of the hardest jobs. The last thing I want to touch on a nitpicky way that just was difficult for me with the immersion was the inconsistent music. I thought it had a lot of really good music in a lot of places, but it would go back and forth between like orchestral to like sort of like synthesized electronic stuff, and then sometimes it would have like pop songs or like a hip hop song during a battle scene, and it was all over the place, and I don't know, it just drew too much attention to it. It wasn't as like integrated into. It had the right emotionality. It was like, like intense,
right
pulsating techno, during an action scene or something. But then at the same time, because the first like 3/4 of the show was very almost like not steampunk exactly, but it had that kind of like flair of modern technology, but it's also like a really like pre-industrial kind of technology with the horse and wagons and stuff. But then you had a lot of the inklings of like they had like the gas power,
kind of like early industrialization,
ODM gear and stuff. And
they were
like,
100 years behind Marley.
I felt like a lot of the synthesized music just took me out of that atmosphere because it was so modern. And then like the pop songs and stuff, I don't know. I felt because if all the music was like that, but it was some of it, like I said, was orchestral and just like normal non-diegetic music. Yeah. And then other times it would be this other stuff. Did you have any reaction
you're
to
right.
that?
I was so much immersed in the show that I let all that slide. But there was a lot of jumping from modern to orchestral. There was a lot of jumps between different types of music.
I felt like if there was one thing that wasn't as intentional, and maybe it was, and they have all the reasons for it, but I felt that the music side of things was the least compelling, and which is, for a show this epic, I don't hold it against it or anything. It wasn't like a huge detractor. To specifically kind of wrap up our Attack on Titan discussion. Diatribe. I would say, like, having seen it now, slept on it, because we're recording this the next day from when we started recording yesterday. I think I, now in hindsight, like and appreciate the show more than as I was watching it, because I was admittingly a little bored, especially through a lot of the dialogue and exposition. The action was always really gripping, and I loved the creativity of the ODM gear and the scale. You had these little tiny like ant-like sized people zipping around giant titans, and the physics of how like the large titans could move slower, the colossal and everything. But then you had like the car titan and the jaw titan that were like like ape-like jumping around super fast, and like all that stuff together, and all the different like technologies and things they were using was like, that was to me was like some of the most compelling stuff. That and like the bigger themes. But a lot of the plot development I found to be like stretching my attention, because it was so elongated, and sometimes it took a long time to get to the point. And then, like I was saying about the characters and everything, I felt like they weren't as characterized or three-dimensionally developed as I would have preferred. It got there eventually, especially towards the end of the fourth season really kind of brought it all together, of course. But for the first 3 seasons, a lot of it I was just like, I was more hooked on what's going to happen next as opposed to what it's going to make me feel next. So for that's kind of my big takeaway. What's your big takeaway reaction having now seen it multiple times?
I don't know. It's this whole package. It's still think it's probably the best epic anime of all time. Okay. I like to compare things by genre. If you say, what's the best anime? It's like, what genre, what era, what's the best band? Well,
you can say, like, what's the best Hollywood movie? Like, that doesn't...
What's the best metal artist or hip-hop artist? Well, what genre, what era? I see things in context. There's not, like, one best ever. But,
absolutely.
I still think, out of all the animes, I think probably feels more adults. And I admittedly relate to the tropes of the school, like, high school anime stuff less and less, and I try to watch other anime shows, and I just can't get into a lot of them because they're too. I've never been a big chibi fan, but I feel like I like some more adults, more
mature,
mature. Even though they're teenagers through most of it, it still felt more adults. They had to adult early, because of the hell they went through. Because I knew it was going to happen. It wasn't gripped the second time through, but I've never been so gripped by a show the first time through. Just like... Yeah,
I remember your enthusiasm.
I could let I knew they're probably inconsistencies and flaws, but I just couldn't see them because I was so immersed in it. Which to me, like, I've admitted I'm not about the details. I'm about the immersive experience.
I would say the same.
And if I'm immersed in something, I don't give a crap if it's even objectively seen as not good or has flaws, whatever, by anybody else. It's like, I am in it, and that's all. I'm there for an experience, not a set of ideas. To me, stories, movies, shows, animes are music. And it's experiential. It's not just a bunch of ideas. The ideas are what first structures or whatever.
Yeah, because otherwise then it would be like a essay or an op-ed or a think piece or something as opposed to a narrative.
Well, especially in this culture where everybody nitpicks everything insanely on YouTube because everyone's mind just thinks too much these days to make up for copium. But people act like everything's just the ideas behind it, not the experience. People need to be more experiential and less...
I've ranted about
hair
this.
Splitting.
I cannot seem to get away from it, but this whole like modern apologist movement about the Star Wars prequels.
Oh yeah,
that embodies this argument to me perfectly because people are so focused on and if that works for you, great. Like I respect that you can get something out of it, because there were ideas, because it had intentions that you found interesting, that you thought
nostalgia.
But like, oh my god, like the experience of those movies is unwatchable. It's painful. They're horrible, horribly executed. It doesn't matter what the idea. I mean, there's so many things you could apply that to that people universally hate.
I did not feel immersed in those movies. I did not feel them.
No, not at all. All right, so the last point I want to make more self-indulgently, but like I said, this podcast is mine, and it's about my journey of storytelling and what we can glean and learn from other people's examples. When I was in 5th grade, I really wanted to write a novel, and I'd been kicking around some different like scenes ideas for a while that were obviously inspired by like for instance, I had this idea like this plane was going down and everybody jumped into the inflatable rafts, but they also hooked a parachute to it. Oh. Remember, I was like 10. And I had this in my mind, like all these people. I was obviously inspired by like Indiana Jones too, when
great movie.
Oh, careful! That's another movie. Everybody's like there's this whole movie where like it's actually the best one.
I couldn't get through it last time I saw it.
Nothing happens for the first hour and a half.
Yeah,
and then the plot finally starts going, and you're like, oh, okay.
But it's bad. It's just bad.
All right, we're going to
dialogue's horrible.
Anyway. Yes, I agree with you. I don't know. As a kid, like I had this like romantic scene in mind where this guy and this girl that met on a plane, and then like a younger kid got separated from her parents, and they were like kind of like this, little found family for a while as they, because the plane went down and the people were scattered and they were in some kind of like warehouse or something. They were all like cuddled up together and scared, but like keeping each other safe and warm. I had these like conglomeration of scenes, and then I wanted to like write a novel, and the novel had a prologue sequence where humanity is having to leave Earth because we've polluted it too much. So it was like WALL-E basically. But remember, this is like in the early to mid 90s, and so they go into big spaceships, and they go off into the. I know, isn't it like? I'm not saying that I'm owed royalties for the conception of WALL-E.
You should be. You should sue Pixar.
But that's I had that. I wanted to do this sort of like futuristic sci-fi martial arts kind of thing. It was going to be action.
Of course.
The main guy was also going to be like this like martial artist.
You're 10. It's got to be karate in it too.
Because we were doing karate.
Yeah.
These characters that they leave Earth and then they're looking for a new home. So it was also like Battlestar Galactica, which I had no conception of at the time. I didn't know. You know what? But what we did have a conception of was Exo Squad, which I still think is not talked about. Nobody talks about Exo Squad, but I think Exo Squad was the cartoon version of Battlestar. Because if you think about it, the Neo Sapiens, the big blue people that were genetically created. By humans to be their workers.
Oh my God.
Revolted,
of course.
And then it's like 50 years later. And there's a new revolt because they were living in peace, but then there's a new revolution, and they take over Earth. What does this sound like in Battlestar Galactica?
Wow, that's Battlestar Galactica.
And they're the humans are like
scattered and on the run. They're trying to fight back against the things, their own creations.
Yeah.
So Exo Squad, I think, was like a kid version of Battlestar Galactica. But anyway, that I did have that, like, you know, as an influence. So there's definitely that there. But anyway, so they don't know where they're going. They're looking for a new home, and they get sucked into a wormhole, and then they find the perfect home, and they settle on it, and then it's like hundreds of years later or whatever. And then that's when we pick up with our martial artist main character and his people. And the reason that their plane goes down, they have to get on the rafts and everything, is because there's this seditious, clandestine, mysterious, like, you know, guerrilla group that's like attacking their country, and they don't know why. And eventually it turns out that the wormhole took them forward in time to Earth, but it's so far ahead in time that, like, the old remnants of humanity were destroyed and you know, completely, like, you know, overtaken by the world. And then the continents continued to move, the plates moved, and everything was different. But one of the factions of people that left Earth originally figured this out before anybody else did, and they were vying for their land back.
Okay.
So that's why they were attacking. Like, they were basically they weren't trying to take over the world. They were trying to get their original land back that they figured out, you know, from, like, the previous version of, you know, Earth in the past. I always had that idea, and, like, I was thought about me, and I tried to write a novel, but I didn't know how to, like, structure it. I didn't understand story and character and everything.
That's a lot to that.
Well, I know, and I was really impressed with myself for being so young and having all these ideas. A lot of them were derivative and, you know, influenced by stuff. But
You're a kid, yeah.
And then in college, I was going to rework it to pitch as a script for, you know, we had to pitch scripts for our senior or our theses for our, like, you know, when we had to write our own unique screenplays for our final projects.
Yeah.
And as I was, like, trying to rework the idea, I realized that it was Planet of the Apes. I just made Planet of the Apes as a kid, but I don't remember I don't think I had seen Planet of the Apes.
No?
I probably knew about. I remember there was, like, a show on Sci-Fi that was for the old reruns of the television show.
I watched it and a few sequels. Yeah.
But I was like, oh my god, all I did was just, like, rework Planet of the Apes. But did I? Like, did I know? I'm still so confused about, like, how it was so similar. It's, you know, it's a time travel.
Yeah.
They're in the same world, but they don't realize it until the end.
Yeah.
And then, you know, it, like, recontextualizes everything. Anyway, the reason I bring that up was because Attack on Titan had that very same experience for me with the story that I've been developing for more than 10 years now that you inspired.
Yeah.
I wanted to tell a Selkie story, and then you had the idea of using the Hawaiian monk seals, and you created these characters, and we started. Yeah, you came up with the characters. I just said I wanted it to be set on Maui.
Oh, okay.
So I have you to thank for all that. At the time when Dave and I were developing this graphic novel more than 10 years ago,
Back when I was doing a lot of art.
inspired these characters for me, and then he that inspired the original story. And it started out as a small kind of family drama thing, but then as I wanted to integrate more of the folklore of the Selkie stuff, it blossomed into this much bigger, wider, more global, and, like, it had, like, tons of, like, backstory lore, and then it had implications for, like, future stuff, because basically it was like these dormant Selkie societies were, like, coming back, and they were being revitalized, but then the old conflicts and old politics and social issues and everything that these old societies had were being revitalized with the new generations of people that were Selkies that were rediscovering themselves. And as they rediscovered who they were, like, physiologically, they were also discovering, like, culturally and sociopolitically. That was at the source of the main conflict, was all the propaganda that they were fed from, like, you know, ancient times that were well predated them, and even anybody that they knew, you know, like, it was just fed to them that these were the bad guys, you're the good guys, but both sides were fed that, you know, in opposite of each other. They were fighting over things that had no actual relevancy to them now, but they were born with that. So the whole story was about breaking the cycle. In the climax of the first part of the graphic novel that we were working on, which, if you're curious, you can see the first, like, 50 pages or so that we did of the graphic novel of that iteration at breathingunderwater.us, but we didn't finish it, and then especially because it got so big and unruly. But I did include the outline for the rest of the story with the graphic novel, so you can at least you can get the view of where I was headed and what we were kind of going for. But what I found really interesting, and I don't know how to like feel about this about myself, once I saw Attack on Titan, I was like, oh my god, this is exactly what I was trying to do with Kanaloa, but I had no concept that was done. So it makes me wonder, is like, okay, do I have these like similar ideas as some of the greats storytellers, or do I have no original ideas at all, and I am just totally somehow like in the ether deriving everything from other great people, and I am completely just a puppet.
You're pulling it from the collective unconscious.
Maybe. I don't know.
But you're a little too late every time.
Yep. I know, and that's so I had this idea, I mean, I don't know how long. Well, actually, because you said the first Attack on Titan season came out like 2013, something like that. 2012.
No, 13 or 14.
That's when we started. That's when we started Kanaloa. So maybe it was just like the story was the energy was put out into the ether, and I was a conduit for the same.
They plagiarized
me.
Shiramo. He plagiarized from your unconscious.
So I should sue him, is what you're saying?
Oh, yeah. Obviously. Yeah.
So the point of this whole podcast and everything that you should know is that I have all the original ideas in the world, and people are just stealing from my subconscious. Kind of like being John Malkovich or something. Like there must be a portal into my brain, and people are just taking stuff out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm owed all the credit and all the money for all the things that you love.
That's what the aliens do with me. Watch one too many X-Files episodes.
No, but honestly though, like in all seriousness, it was like disappointed. Like, oh man, I just wrote the same story that's already been done. Dang it! But
dang damn it!
But it's also very like validating and vindicating that like these stories that are so beloved and so widespread known, and acknowledged and revered, that like I could even conceptualize something, some level of that is nice to know that like at least even if I'm not an original thinker, at least I am a parallel thinker to some degree to some of the greats. So that's something, that makes me feel good. So I don't know if I have anything original to say, but I think I still am interested in the profoundness of life and storytelling and existence and stuff. So with that, like I've said before, Jeremiah from the Mobius Project and I are working on a new iteration of this story. And you know what, I got to say, Attack on Titan really helped me let go of what I was holding on to with that story, because it was like, hey, I really want to illustrate, and I was like, I really want to tell my story. I was like, perfect, let's make our graphic novel. But it wasn't, at first I was like, well, I'll just pick up where I left off with you. But then I went back and read through my old outline of that, and now I was watching Attack on Titan at the time, and I was like, I can't tell this story now. It's not worth it. It's been done, and it's been done much better. But I was also kind of freeing. It was like, okay, this is out there. I've got my version conceptualized, that nothing can take away from that. But now I'm free to do anything else with this, and I still love the characters and I love the world. And what I've been able to do is, all the ideas I had before were so big and unwieldy that part of what happened, and actually this is something I meant to mention with Attack on Titan, was that the lore that I was creating started simple, and it just kept getting more and more convoluted and indulgent and unwieldy, because I needed it to explain the plot as the plot got bigger and more. So it was like kind of this like vicious cycle of like, I need the plot to get to this point. Okay, so that means I need to contrive some sort of supernatural thing. Oh, but now I need to explain why that supernatural thing is a thing. And then I had to go back and fit it in and set it up, and it just kept like making things more and more bloated. And now Attack on Titan has just made me like feel free of like letting all that go, and I've managed to like look at these characters on their more micro scale and be like, who are these people? What do they really want? What is the real story here amongst these people? Not the bigger plot lore stuff. And it's been nice because I've been able to then sprinkle in a lot of that lore that I liked before, and the implications of, like shape-shifting seals and stuff. But that's not the focus of it. Now it's a much more emotionally driven, character-driven story. Yeah. It's more streamlined, it's smaller. And with that, though, it feels more emotionally impactful for me. You know, it's like I'm actually telling like a story on a human level more than like isn't this like this big bombastic crazy thing, you know? So I'm not trying to solve all the world's problems with this one. I'm just putting my life experiences and things, you know, into a story which feels a lot more honest and authentic and personal. So I'm excited to share that with the world. It's going to be a long time before it, you know, comes out, but stay tuned. Lots more on that to come. Dave, thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
We will say sayonara for now, or whatever language Dave prefers.
Think cuidado.
All right. Goodbye. Thank you. Bye.